Hey guys, it's your cool Uncle Primal Chaos here, and today we're checking out another drop from Meshuggah's Immutable album. It's called Light the Shortening Fuse. It's been out for a couple of days, so I'm a little bit late to the party on this one. But yeah, if you're new around here, I tend to like to add a little bit more value to the reactions by talking about production and technique and musicianship and songwriting and stuff like that. So I'll be stopping a few times through the video. So if you're not familiar with the song, or if it's, you haven't really sort of digested it just because it's fairly new, maybe go check out the song by itself first and then check in again with me. Because, some people can find it a little bit frustrating how often I stop to talk about stuff, but that's the whole point. What else am I doing here? If I'm not stopping to talk about it, then what value am I adding to the experience of listening to the song? So go check it out if you haven't already. And if you have, welcome. All right. So listen, I don't know too much about what's going on with this one. As you guys know, I'm new to a lot of these bands. Meshuggah is no different. I've heard maybe 2 or 3 of their songs now. But, all I know is that, look, their brand of metal is very technical and chaotic, particularly, which I'm really into. Sometimes these reactions can be tricky because they can be a little overwhelming because there's so much coming at you at once. So I'll do my best to scramble and try and pick out some things that maybe you hadn't heard, just to make the listening experience a little bit more interesting. So without too much further ado, let's just dive right in. Again, I'm not really sure what to expect, but I'm expecting it's going to be a punch in the face. Let's go. Alrighty. Okay, first of all, the first thing that's jumped out to me is the guitar tones are really nice. They're just, I suspect a lot of people are moving to sort of reamping and stuff like that, which means that they'll record essentially a clean guitar signal direct from the guitar into a computer, usually via some way where the player can hear themselves playing through an amp or something like that. But they'll record a clean sound into the recording software or whatever, and then they'll use plugins to make that sound like a guitar amp, right? And the reason you would do that is because it gives you kind of limitless options in mixing. You can pretty much change the entire sound of everything once it's already been laid down. One of the things I've noticed that sort of gives that away a little bit is there's a certain sound you get from putting a guitar through a loud amplifier, particularly if you're using like a quad box, like a 4x12, Marshall quad box or whatever it might be, is that there's a certain, with chuggy riffs like this, there's a certain punch that comes from the speaker cones just bouncing, they just sort of, it's almost like they're just punching the air. And so you get this sort of like, it's hard to describe it. It's punch is like the only way of describing it. It's almost like a popping sound of the speakers slapping against the air as they bounce as you hit each sort of chuggy note. It's part of the joy of playing through a loud amp, to be perfectly honest, because you suddenly get access to that chest bashing kind of pump that you get every time you do a palm muted chug, right? And I suspect I can sort of hear that in this recording. So this sounds to me more like a mic'd up amplifier than a reamped clean guitar signal, which is really nice to see. And I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all. These guys are juggernauts, you know what I mean? They're not recording most likely in someone's bedroom like most bands are these days, you know. But yeah, like I just love that. And there's just sort of like this sort of warm, sort of caramel kind of warmth to the guitar sound that is, it just doesn't sound as digital. And I really dig that. The other thing that's really interesting so far is the bounce to the rhythm, right? It's got kind of like this, let's just jump back a bit. I don't think I've heard that style of riff before. Like, you know, you've got things like your sort of Iron Maiden gallops, and you've got, you know, a lot of different things with just interesting tempo and time changes and stuff like that. But this is kind of like just this sort of tribal sort of, you know, rhythm that I don't think I've heard it in metal before. That said, again, I'm kind of new to this, so correct me if I'm wrong. If this is a very, you know, like a blast beat is a very common beat, this could also be a very common beat, but to me, it's kind of new to my ears. It's got a swing to it that's kind of unusual, you know. That's a great sonic motif as well. Man, one thing that these guys seem to be really good at is subverting your expectations rhythmically. Like, to a far less degree, like Tool has been able to do that. Like, you know, they'll play in sevens and nines and things, and the effect of that, like, if you're not really familiar with rhythms and how they work, is when you play in those odd meters, what it sort of means for the feel of the song is that it creates tension, right? So when, as a human being, the way we relate to rhythms is typically in groups of four, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's an even cycle. So you get used to feeling that cycle. And so when you play in, say, sevens, right? Like 7, 8 or something like that, all that means is that instead of counting to an even number like 4 or 8, you're counting to an odd number like 7, which essentially equates to just tearing a beat off the end of like a bar of 8, right? So if you were counting sort of like in 8s, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is comfortable. But if you go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, that dropped beat, it sort of, it pulls you out of your comfort zone. You're like, oh wait, we're not, you know, because now all of a sudden you're bopping out of time, right? As you go through the next 7 or whatever. And, you know, a lot of times if it's easier to think of, you know, sevens as a group of 4 and 3, right? So where you'd normally have like a 4/4 beat going along comfortably, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you, you know, if you throw in like a bar of 3 at the end of that, it kind of makes a grouping of 7, like 4 and 3. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. See how it's sort of like, it sort of pulls you out of your comfort zone. And so to take that to a much more extreme version of that, you've got Meshuggah playing around with that sort of stuff, melodically and with riffs and stuff as well. And so you end up really getting pushed and pulled in a bunch of different directions. if you know that's kind of like a fundamentals explanation of why, if you're not familiar with rhythms and that sort of thing, why it feels so disjointed, and in a way that kind of feels interesting, because you're like, oh, where are they taking me? And I suspect that a lot of people, I mean, there's plenty of musicians out there who would love bands like Meshuggah and Tool and stuff like that, and 100% understand what's going on, and probably get off more on the understanding how complex these arrangements are vibe. But I also suspect that there's a large chunk of people out there who have no musical knowledge or background, who still like Meshuggah, probably just as passionately, and just don't understand what's going on. And so that's just a real broad strokes explanation. They're sort of subverting your expectations of the physicality of feeling the beat. You're sort of sitting there in the groove going, yeah, okay, I get it. And then all of a sudden they'll drop a beat out, and then they'll go back to the same part again, where you go, oh, okay, I'm back in my comfort zone again, and then they'll drop another beat, or they'll, add an extra beat to a bar, or do something that sort of really messes with your head. But what makes these guys really creative with it is they use it in interesting ways. It's not just, oh, we're not just tearing a beat out of this bar for just the sake of doing it. It's like, how does it affect what we're doing, with our rhythm section, like melodically, or like how does it affect it sort of in a way that, it just makes this part more interesting, because they could easily, you could rewrite this song, and every time they drop a beat out, you could throw an extra beat in and just make it a very standard, 4/4 style rock and roll song. But it just wouldn't be Meshuggah, and it probably wouldn't be anywhere near as interesting, But yeah, I hope that sort of clears that up a little bit, because the thing is, I myself struggle to count time, because it's just a practice thing. I think you get used to hearing how the pushing and pulling works for different degrees of counts, right? And so a lot of people can just be like, oh, they're playing 7/8 here, and they're playing 13, whatever the case may be. I'm sort of not at that level personally, because I just haven't put in the time to learn to recognize these things, and counting them is tricky, because you sort of get to a 7 and then you're not sure if you're on the 1, because it's just so confusing, but I think the key to learning that is to learn to recognize the patterns, and particularly the way a drummer will work in the right amount of snare hits to hit 7, or, there's a lot of different techniques, I'd say. But, if you weren't familiar with how the rhythms work, the easiest way to think of it is just taking a beat out of one of the bars, Anyway, let's go back a little bit. What's really interesting through this part is that the drummer, it's sort of like he's almost not playing a rhythm at all. His snare is just accenting the guitar riffs. Like if you listen to it. He's just playing along with everyone else. Like a lot of times you'll have a drummer just sort of sitting in a groove, and that's sort of setting the tone for the riffs. And then the guitar players, or, whoever else, the keyboard players or whoever else in the band, will come up with a riff to go over the top of that complements the rhythm. But in this case, it's almost like everyone's just playing the same rhythm, It's really interesting. It's a really sort of dissonant interval between what the guitars are playing and that sound. I'm assuming it's a guitar sound. It sounds like a synth of some sort, but you know, it's always hard to tell because sounds are getting so, you know, guitar sounds in particular are getting so warped and stuff nowadays that it's sometimes hard to tell what's a synth and what's a guitar sound. But I just love that, again, it's this weird, uncomfortable interval. Like, discomfort seems to be the way to describe how Meshuggah composes music. But it's just, you know, there's a lot going on sonically that just sort of is a mishmash that somehow still works. And the whole idea of it is to put you, is to take away and, like, to give you a sense of unease, right? And so listen to that when it comes in again. Immediately it just puts your teeth on edge. And it sounds like a warning. No, 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 no. I think it's something like that. What's the bass? It's interesting. Yeah, actually, harmonically it sounds okay there, but it's just like, with whatever sounds they're using, it's sort of a little bit disjointed. No. Yeah, there's definitely notes in there that are unusual intervals. Use synths? I was sort of under the impression that they wouldn't, but it sounds definitely like there's some synthesized sort of parts in there. But again, I love that there's just, like, harmonically, there's just so much just randomized sort of things that sort of work harmonically, but in a weird way, you know? I think that sort of fades in. Oh no, it's pretty loud. Again, the drums are just sort of, everybody's sort of playing the same. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, actually, you know what's interesting about that? I feel like like I said, the guitar riff is whatever it is, right? It's that pattern. The drums are just modeled around that same feel, with just a lot of, I guess it's snare or whatever, just following exactly what the guitar pattern's doing. Where I feel like a lot of drummers out there would be doing everything they can to fill that space, right? As it stands, there's a lot going on in this, but there's this room in the mix because the drummer isn't just pounding every single skin, doing insane fills and stuff throughout. I think there's something to be said for like the lack of ego, where it's like, oh, there's an empty space here, I got to make it more complex. I'm just going to add some fills, or I'm going to overplay. It doesn't seem to be a thing here. It seems like only what's necessary is getting played because the music's already complex enough, right? They don't need to fill all the gaps. And I think a lot of times when bands do that, it's because they want to prove that they're good. They want to prove that they have compositional ability above and beyond what people might expect. And so they'll come up with flourishes and little, counter rhythms and polyrhythms and things like that aren't super necessary in that moment, right? And oftentimes those things are fun to discover. Like it's like, I'm not hassling anyone for doing that. I'm just saying in the case of Meshuggah, in this song particularly, it seems like they've left a lot of room that could have been filled with a bunch of other stuff, and they've opted for an incredibly complex simplicity, if that makes sense. Where it's, they're just they're saying what they need to say and nothing else. And that's really interesting. And I guess that's the sign of a band that has the maturity of someone like Meshuggah. They've been around long enough. They already know that people know that they're capable of doing insane things. And so if the song warrants something insane, then they'll provide it. And if it doesn't in that moment, then they'll leave a lot of space. So, and that actually gives some dynamics to the more complex parts of the songs too. It allows you to have moments of quiet against moments of chaos, and that's really interesting. I think a much younger band or a much newer band might not make the same choices. Awesome. Nice. All right. Check back in after the ad break and I'll do a bit of a rundown. Hey guys, this video is made possible by Enchroma. 1 in 6 guys and 1 in 200 women are colorblind, and if that happens to be you, there's something you can do about it. Click the link in the description, it'll take you to Enchroma's website where you can get a free eye test. And while you're there, maybe pick up some corrective lenses. They've got styles to suit everybody and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so you got really nothing to lose. And while you're there, use the code CHAOS in checkout to get 10% off. Tell them Primal Chaos sent you. All right, and we're back. So yeah, I think I pretty much covered most of it in the listen through. Look, these guys, we all know that they've been around forever, and we know that they have a niche audience of people who I guess like to have their expectations subverted. And by that I mean people who are, they get lost in the chaos of songs like this, right? They like to feel like the movement, the underlying movement, change direction. They like to be challenged by, I was just reading through the lyrics as well. There's some interesting concepts through there. It seems like this is like a little bit of a slap in the face to religion, and the chaos and angst that it sort of creates. Although it's a little bit sort of vague. So, with things like wading through the rubble of ideologies, cherry picking the madness of the gospel of suckers, and that's pretty stock standard, but there's a certain amount of poetry to these lyrics, which I really find endearing as well. But yeah, this is kind of what I expected from Meshuggah. It's, a lot of times for me personally, I find, again, music that's this subversive rhythmically can be a little bit distracting for me. The one thing, and I don't want to be the guy who's like comparing Tool and Meshuggah, because they're both juggernauts, they're both amazing. But I think the reason that I find Tool a little bit more immediately accessible is that I find them marginally, not dramatically, but marginally more fluid in the way that they do those sort of timing changes and stuff like that, where it sounds to me anyway, they just seem to come off a little bit more like organic in those choices. Although actually, to be fair, I think Meshuggah is another one of the bands that are very similar in that regard. I think a lot of times there's bands out there like math rock bands and things like that tend to, or mathcore or whatever, they tend to try to ape what guys like Meshuggah and Tool do, by compositionally, by, you know, using the same techniques of like I said, dropping a beat here, adding a beat there, and, you know, doing interesting changes of like from part to part in the song, you know, where they'll pull you along at like 4/4 for a minute and then suddenly switch in a few bars of like 7 or 3 or something to just really throw you off kilter and jump back in. I think, you know, a lot of these other bands that do it, that try to emulate what, say, Meshuggah or Tool do, is that they tend to overcomplicate things, and they add the complexity not for the passion of the song, but for just like to demonstrate their skill level. Like let's make it super complex, right? And the fans will love it because the fans love the complexity. I don't think the fans love the complexity. I think they love the way that these sort of juggernaut bands are able to navigate those sort of timing changes and stuff in a way that's clever and interesting to listen to, you know, rather than, okay, guys, we're going to do a bar of 6 and then a bar of 7 and then a bar of 4 and a bar of 3, you know, to try to seem like we're capable of putting together this opus of just chaos, right? Whereas I think these bands that have been around a little bit longer, a little bit more mature, you know, or even guys like Meshuggah, who kind of, to a degree, I'd imagine, really sort of kicked off this genre, right? I think that they get it a little bit more. They get the reason behind it. And the reason behind it is to play something that's less ordinary, you know, but in a way that sort of backs it up beautifully and melodically as well. It's kind of like, oh God, I can't believe I'm going to say this when I just mentioned Tool, but it's kind of like, you know, how these, like the Fibonacci sequence and stuff like that are these, like, you know, mathematical concepts that happen in nature that when you sort of start to study them, like pi and things like that, the complexity is clearly there mathematically, but you can render out the effects of those things in a way that looks beautiful. Like, you know, with the Fibonacci sequence, you've got the, you know, the seashell, you know, or with pi, you've got like, you know, perfect circles and things like that. Another Tool reference. But you know what I mean? Like these guys seem to compose on a level of more the way that nature would create chaos, as opposed to somebody who's a first year math student who's trying to impress their professor. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so look, these guys are always going to be greats. And again, I say that with all the confidence of somebody who is very new to these sort of extreme metal genres, you know. So I if anything, I come from more of a place of appreciating power metal and things like that, which is far more melodic, far more simplistic in its rhythmic composition and stuff like that. And of course, I like everything else too. It's not just like, as far as metal goes, my choices always seem to sort of move towards the more dramatic, sort of cinematic stuff. So, you know, take all of this with a grain of salt, but yeah, hopefully some of this is jived with how you feel about this sort of stuff. Yeah. But anyway, that's about it from me. As always, if you feel like I've brightened your day at all, I'd appreciate you if you just buy me a coffee. That's a great way of supporting the channel. There's a link in the description. Also, just like, share, subscribe, follow. I'm trying to get music out there to as many people as possible, so that helps greatly as well. Yeah, but if there's anything else you want me to check out within this sort of genre or field, let me know, because there's a pretty good chance I haven't heard it. Yeah, and I'm happy to take a look at anything, you know, or if you disagree with anything I said in this video, drop a comment as well. Again, no obligation here. I don't know too much about this genre, so I'd appreciate the education. So yeah, yeah. Thanks again, guys. I've been Primal Chaos. I'll catch you on the next one.